He sat there in his $8,000 Brioni suit, conferring with his team of Silicon Valley legal assassins, gesturing dismissively at the solitary woman in yellow across the aisle. Dwayne thought the divorce was already a done deal. He thought freezing Glenda's accounts meant she would fold. He even told the judge she was too paralyzed by privilege to hire proper counsel. But Dwayne forgot one crucial detail about Glenda's lineage, specifically, who raised her. When an older woman in the third row of the gallery stood up and calmly interrupted the judge's ruling, the smirk didn't just vanish from Dwayne's face. His entire world began to collapse. You were about to witness a billionaire's empire dismantled by the one woman he never saw coming. Stick around to find out how a retired federal judge takes down a tech billionaire piece by piece. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Here's how it all went down. The air inside Courtroom 12 of the San Francisco Superior Court was sterile, carrying the faint scent of mahogany polish and institutional cleaning products. It was the smell of finality, of things being severed cleanly and efficiently. For Dwayne Owen, however, the atmosphere smelled like vindication. Dwayne adjusted the platinum cufflinks on his tailored shirt, each one worth more than the average paralegal's monthly salary, and tapped his fingers on the plaintiff's table with the same methodical rhythm he used to analyze quarterly earnings. "She's late," Dwayne murmured to the woman beside him, checking his Apple Watch. "Or maybe she's finally accepted the economics of this situation." Beside him sat Miranda Voss, not just a lawyer, but a strategic weapon. Senior partner at Voss, Sterling, and Cross, she was known in Bay Area legal circles as the tech dominatrix, a woman who specialized in protecting billionaires from expensive mistakes, which is how she referred to inconvenient spouses. She didn't just win divorce cases, she engineered them like hostile takeovers, leaving the opposition with nothing but NDAs and therapy bills. Miranda smoothed the collar of her charcoal power suit, her eyes scanning the empty defense table with clinical detachment. "Timing is irrelevant," Dwayne said. "Let's execute this efficiently. I have a board meeting at Peninsula Capital at 2:30. Don't worry, Miranda. By 2:30, I'll be untangled from this liability, and she'll be calling old college friends asking if anyone knows a good real estate agent in Oakland." The bailiff, a wiry man named Officer Chen, who had witnessed enough divorces to lose faith in marriage entirely, called out, "All rise, the Honorable Judge Jacob Allen presiding." The room shuffled to its feet with the rustling of expensive suits and nervous anticipation. Judge Allen entered, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen every manipulation tactic invented. He took his seat with practiced efficiency, adjusted his reading glasses, and opened the file before him. "Be seated," Judge Allen commanded. His voice carried authority without volume. He scanned the documents. "Case number 2024-FL0886, Owen versus Owen. We are here for preliminary proceedings regarding asset division and spousal support in a high net worth dissolution." Judge Allen looked towards the plaintiff's table. "Miss Voss, I see you've assembled quite a team." Miranda Voss stood smoothly, flanked by two associates and a forensic accountant. "Your Honor, we are prepared to proceed expeditiously. Mr. Owen's time is valuable, and we believe this matter can be resolved today." The judge's eyes moved to the defense table. His brow furrowed. "Mrs. Owen," Judge Allen said, his tone shifting to something almost concerned. "You appear to be unrepresented. Are you expecting counsel?" Glenda stood slowly, the yellow blazer suddenly seeming too bright, too bold for someone so exposed.
Her voice was soft but steady. "I have representation, Your Honor." Dwayne let out a sharp, derisive laugh, a sound he usually reserved for pitching entrepreneurs who didn't understand market forces. He didn't bother covering it. Judge Allen's gaze snapped at Dwayne. "Is something amusing, Mr. Owen?" Miranda Voss rose immediately, placing a restraining hand near Dwayne's shoulder without actually touching him, a gesture that communicated control without affection. "Apologies, Your Honor. My client is understandably frustrated. This proceeding has been prolonged unnecessarily, creating operational inefficiencies in his business holdings." "Keep your client's frustrations silent, Miss Voss," the judge said flatly. He turned back to Glenda. "Mrs. Owen, these proceedings began 7 minutes ago. The court's time is finite. I don't see anyone at your table." "I have legal representation, Your Honor," Glenda said, and for the first time there was something in her voice, not fear, but quiet certainty. "Then where is your attorney?" Dwayne interjected, leaning forward so his words carried across the aisle. "Hiding under the table? Or maybe the retainer check bounced. Oh wait, you can't write checks anymore, can you, Glenda? I had the accounts restructured Tuesday morning." "Mr. Owen!" The gavel came down like a gunshot. "One more unsolicited comment, and I will hold you in contempt." "My apologies, Your Honor." Dwayne stood and buttoned his jacket, theatrically humility. "I simply want to be transparent here. My wife is clearly confused about the complexities of corporate law and high net worth asset protection. She has no independent income, no professional network capable of this level of litigation. I offered her a generous settlement last week, $5 million and the Palo Alto townhouse. She refused."
Dwayne turned to face Glenda directly, his eyes as cold as a quarterly earnings call. "I tried to be reasonable, Glenda. I tried to make this clean, but you insisted on this emotional theater. Now look at you, sitting there with nothing. You don't have a lawyer because no one takes charity cases in Silicon Valley. We all know you can't afford anyone competent enough to go against Voss, Sterling, and Cross." "Mr. Owen, sit down now," Judge Allen snapped. "Your Honor," Miss Voss interjected smoothly, sensing the perfect opening. "While my client's delivery is regrettable, the substance is valid. We are wasting the court's resources. Mrs. Owen clearly has not secured appropriate representation. Under California Family Code Section 2030, we move to proceed immediately with a modified bifurcation and interim asset distribution. The respondent has had 15 weeks to prepare." Judge Allen looked at Glenda. He looked genuinely pained. "Mrs. Owen, Miss Voss is correct about the procedural timeline. If you cannot produce legal counsel right now, I must assume you intend to represent yourself pro se. Given that your husband's holdings include 17 corporate entities, 3 venture capital funds, and international assets across 14 jurisdictions, that would be inadvisable." "I am not representing myself," Glenda said quietly, her eyes steady at the judge. "She's delusional," Dwayne hissed to Miranda. "She has nobody. Her father was a small-town pharmacist, and her mother was a—" She stopped, trying to remember. "What did you tell me your mother did, Glenda, before she retired? Something boring and bureaucratic?" Glenda didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. "Your Honor," Miranda pressed, rising to full height like a predator sensing wounded prey. "The defense table is empty. There is no attorney present. We move to proceed immediately." Judge Allen sighed. He reached for his gavel. "Mrs. Owen, I apologize, but we cannot delay further. We will proceed with Your Honor." The voice came from the gallery, calm, authoritative, and carrying the weight of decades of judicial command. It cut through the courtroom like a laser through fog.
Everyone turned. A woman in the third row stood up slowly, deliberately. She was in her early 70s, though her posture was as straight as steel. She wore an immaculate navy suit with a silk scarf that probably cost what most lawyers billed per hour. Her silver-white hair was styled in a precise bob that said boardroom and battlefield simultaneously. She held a burgundy leather briefcase in one hand. Behind her, two younger attorneys, a man and a woman, stood as well, both carrying matching litigation bags.
Dwayne spun in his chair, confusion flashing across his face. Miranda Voss's pen froze mid-notation. The court reporter's fingers hovered above her machine. The woman began walking down the gallery aisle toward the bar, her heels clicking against the floor with the steady rhythm of a countdown timer. Each step seemed to drain color from the room. Miranda Voss's face went white. Her expression, usually a mask of corporate invincibility, cracked. Her mouth opened slightly, and for the first time in her career, she looked genuinely unsure. "No," whispered Miranda, and there was shock in her voice. "That's not possible." "Who is that?" Dwayne asked, confused by his lawyer's reaction. "Was she in the gallery this whole time?" "I thought," Miranda's voice had lost all its confidence. "She can't be." The woman reached the bar, opened the gate, and walked directly to the defense table. She didn't immediately acknowledge Glenda. She didn't look at the judge. She turned, slowly and deliberately, and looked directly at Dwayne Owen. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just discovered every password to your life. "Your Honor," the woman said, her voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room without raising in volume. "I apologize for the unconventional entrance, but I've been in this gallery since proceedings began, and I believe it's time I make my appearance formal." Dwayne felt his blood turn to ice. Judge Allen leaned forward, his eyes widening. "Counsel, please state your name for the record." The woman placed a cream-colored business card on the court reporter's desk with the casual precision of someone playing a trump card. She turned to face the judge. "Glenda Rossana, retired Chief Judge, United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. I am entering my appearance as lead counsel for the respondent, Glenda Owen." She paused, letting that information settle like fallout. Then she looked at Dwayne again and added with surgical precision, "I am also her mother." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes the collapse of empires. Dwayne's brain tried to process the information. Chief Judge? Ninth Circuit? Mother? The words wouldn't connect into anything coherent. "Mother?" he stammered, looking from the imposing woman in navy to his wife in yellow. "Glenda, you said your mother was retired. You said she worked in local government or something." Glenda finally looked up, and for the first time in months, she met her husband's eyes directly. Her chin was high. "I said she was retired from the federal bench, Dwayne. You weren't listening. You never listen." "Retired," Glenda Rossana repeated, the word hanging in the air like a verdict. She moved around the defense table with unhurried precision, taking the chair beside her daughter. She didn't embrace Glenda just yet. This was business. She placed her briefcase on the table and opened it with two sharp clicks. "Glenda left the legal world 20 years ago," Glenda continued, pulling out a thick folder marked with a red wax seal, the kind of seal used for federal court documents. "She wanted a life outside my shadow. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not as the daughter of a federal appellate judge." Glenda turned her gaze to Miranda Voss.
The opposing attorney was currently trying to become invisible in her chair. "Hello, Miranda," Glenda said with terrifying pleasantness. "I haven't seen you since the Synapse Networks merger litigation in 2019. You were second chair then, weren't you, watching the real attorneys work?" Miranda Voss swallowed hard. Her face flushed. "Judge Rosanna, I didn't know you were admitted to practice in California Civil Court." "I am admitted in California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Hawaii, and before the United States Supreme Court. I generally handle constitutional law and federal appellate matters. But when my daughter called me 5 days ago, weeping, telling me that a tech entrepreneur with more ambition than ethics was attempting to financially coerce her into signing away her legal rights." She paused, letting the words land like artillery shells. "I decided to make an exception." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document bound with a red wax seal. "And I decided that this case is no longer just about asset division." She placed the document on the table. "Your Honor, I am filing a motion to consolidate these proceedings with a federal criminal referral. My daughter is not just seeking a divorce, she is seeking justice for systematic fraud, corporate espionage, and violations of the Foreign Corporate Practices Act." "Objection!" Duane yelled, rocketing to his feet. Panic was blooming across his face like blood in water. Glenda Rosanna turned to him slowly. Her smile widened. "Mr. Owen," she said softly, "you should sit down. This is going to take a while."
3 months earlier, Duane had sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Owen Global Holdings, watching the fog roll across the bay, and decided his marriage had reached its depreciation point. He'd never loved Glenda. Love was for people who didn't understand resource allocation. What he'd felt 15 years ago when he met her at a Stanford alumni mixer was something more valuable: strategic alignment. She was poised, came from respectable lineage. Her mother was a federal appellate judge, he'd learned, though he'd never bothered to research which court or what that actually meant. And most importantly, she made him look human. At 28, Duane had already founded 2 companies and was building his third. Investors liked founders who appeared stable, grounded, family-oriented. Glenda was the perfect accessory. The marriage had functioned like a well-coded algorithm for 15 years. She managed the social calendar, attended charity galas, smiled at board dinners. She built her little nonprofit ventures with the allowance he gave her, staying occupied and out of his strategic planning. But then she'd made a miscalculation. 6 months ago, at a Peninsula Razor, she'd publicly disagreed with him about Owen Global's labor practices in front of 3 venture capital partners. She'd called his offshore manufacturing strategy ethically questionable. The phrase had appeared in TechCrunch the next morning. That's when Duane realized Glenda was becoming a liability. She was developing opinions. Worse, she was voicing them. In Silicon Valley, you could forgive incompetence, but not disloyalty. He'd run the numbers that same week. California was a community property state, but with the right legal team and proper asset restructuring, he could minimize damage. Miranda Voss had assured him they could freeze her liquidity, pressure her into a quick settlement, and have him back on the market within 90 days. Think of it as a corporate spin-off, clean, efficient, and ultimately profitable. Duane had nodded. That's exactly what it was, a divestment. Glenda Owen was simply an underperforming asset that needed to be liquidated. He'd told her over breakfast at the kitchen island of their Atherton mansion, the same place where he usually reviewed acquisition targets. "I'm filing for divorce," he'd said, not looking up from his tablet. "My attorneys will contact you this afternoon. I suggest you cooperate. It'll be easier for both of us." Glenda had gone very still. Then she'd asked one question: why?
Duane had finally looked at her, genuinely profused by her confusion. "Because it makes strategic sense," he'd said. Then he'd left for a board meeting, leaving her sitting there in silence, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold.
The week before Glenda Rosanna stood up in that courtroom gallery, Glenda had sat at that same defense table for 3 preliminary hearings, each one more humiliating than the last. The first hearing was procedural. Miranda Wass had filed 17 motions simultaneously, each one designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Glenda had shown up with a yellow legal pad and a pen she'd borrowed from the bailiff. She'd watched as Miranda's team wheeled in 3 banker's boxes of financial documents, spreading them across the plaintiff's table like a military deployment. Duane had worn his most expensive suit, the Navy Tom Ford he reserved for investor presentations, and had spent the entire hearing checking his phone, as if even being there was beneath his time. Judge Allen had asked Glenda twice if she had retained counsel. Twice she'd said she was working on it, her voice barely audible over the air conditioning system. Miranda had smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your Honor, we're willing to be generous given Mrs. Owen's circumstances. We propose a settlement conference next week." The second hearing had been worse. Duane's forensic accountant, a sharp-faced woman named Dr. Jessica Martinez, had presented a PowerPoint that made Glenda's non-profit work look like embezzlement. Every donation Glenda had made to her foundation, every expense she'd authorized, was reframed as marital asset misappropriation. The slides were color-coded, red for questionable transactions, which apparently included the time she'd donated to a women's shelter using their joint account. Glenda sat there, hands folded, watching her entire adult life being quantified and weaponized. She wanted to speak, to explain that every penny had been documented, that the foundation had proper 501c3 status, that she'd built something meaningful. But every time she opened her mouth, Miranda would interrupt with another procedural objection, another technical term she didn't understand. By the end, she'd simply stopped trying. Duane had leaned across the aisle that day, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent he'd worn on their wedding day. "You're embarrassing yourself," he whispered. "Take the settlement. $5 million is more than you deserve." The third hearing had been the breaking point. Miranda had filed an emergency motion to freeze Glenda's credit cards, her access to their joint accounts, even her ability to use the Tesla registered in her name. "Your Honor, Mrs. Owen has demonstrated a pattern of financial irresponsibility. For her own protection, we recommend supervised access to funds pending final dissolution." Judge Allen had looked uncomfortable approving it, but the law was on Duane's side. California allowed such measures with sufficient documentation, and Miranda had brought sufficient documentation. That night, Glenda had stood in the kitchen of the Atherton mansion, soon to be just Duane's mansion, and had called her mother for the first time in 20 years. She'd been sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Mom, I need help. I don't know what to do." There had been a long pause on the other end of the phone. Then Glenda Rosanna's voice, calm and cold as steel. "Tell me everything. And Glenda, don't leave anything out." That conversation had lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Glenda wasn't crying anymore. She was planning. The silence after Glenda Rosanna identified herself lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then the courtroom erupted into controlled chaos. Miranda Voss recovered first, her attorney instincts overriding her shock. She stood, smoothing her suit jacket with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Judge Rosanna has been retired from the federal bench for 6 years. Her appearance here, while certainly prestigious, doesn't change the fundamental nature of these proceedings." Glenda didn't look at Miranda.
She pulled a manila folder from her briefcase and approached the bench with the confident stride of someone who'd walked toward judicial benches for 40 decades. Your Honor, I am submitting my formal appearance as lead counsel for the respondent, along with my California bar certification, which has remained active despite my retirement from the judiciary. Judge Allen took the documents, his hands moving mechanically. Every lawyer in San Francisco knew who Glenda Rosana was, the Iron Judge, the woman who'd written the Ninth Circuit opinion that restructured corporate fraud prosecution, the jurist who'd sent 3 Fortune 500 CEOs to federal prison. Judge Rosana, Judge Allen said carefully, I need to ensure there are no ethical conflicts. You're representing your own daughter in civil proceedings. The California bar has specific guidelines. I am aware of the guidelines, Your Honor. I've taught legal ethics at Stanford for the past 5 years. I have secured a written waiver from my client acknowledging our relationship and confirming her informed consent. It's in the filing. This is absurd, Duane finally found his voice. You can't just waltz in here and take over a case that's been... Mr. Owen, Judge Allen said sharply, you are not an attorney. Be silent. Glenda turned to face Duane for the second time. Mr. Owen, I am not taking over anything. I am providing counsel to someone who has systematically denied the resources to defend herself, which, I should note, may also constitute legal coercion under California Family Code 2030. She turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I am also filing an emergency motion to consolidate these proceedings with a federal criminal referral. Over the past week, my associates and I have been coordinating with an ongoing FBI investigation into Owen Global Holdings. The Bureau has been building a case for 18 months, and my daughter's nonprofit foundation is central to their evidence of wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate espionage. The courtroom went deathly quiet. Miranda Voss's face drained of color. Your Honor, this is a transparent delay tactic. We are here for a divorce proceeding, not a criminal trial. You were here for a divorce proceeding, Glenda corrected. Now you're here for something much more serious. She placed the red-sealed document on the clerk's desk. I have documentation from the FBI's white-collar crime division. They've been investigating Owen Global Holdings for 18 months, and sustenance is central to their evidence. Duane stood up so fast his chair toppled backward.
Judge Allen gavelled 3 times before order was restored. Duane was forced back into his seat by Officer Chen, his face flushed red, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Miranda Voss had her phone out, presumably texting her senior partners that their billionaire client was about to become a significant liability. Glenda Rosana waited for the room to settle, then continued as if there had been no interruption. Your Honor, I would like to present Evidence A. She gestured to one of her associates, who wheeled forward a cart containing a single accordion file. This contains documentation of 47 wire transfers over the past 3 years, totaling approximately $83 million that passed through my daughter's nonprofit foundation, the Owen Community Initiative. She pulled out a bound document and handed copies to the court clerk, to Judge Allen, and to a stunned Miranda Voss. Each transfer originated from one of Owen's offshore accounts, specifically shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. The money was transferred into the foundation's account, held for exactly 30 days, then transferred out to what appeared to be legitimate charitable recipients. Except those recipients don't exist. They're phantom organizations with falsified 501c3 registrations. The money was then rerouted back to Owen Global Holdings through a series of cryptocurrency conversions, effectively washing the funds clean. Glenda stared at the documents in front of her, her hands shaking. She'd signed off on those transfers. Duane had brought them to her himself, had told her they were part of a new corporate giving initiative, had praised her for building such an efficient foundation. She trusted him.
Judge Allen was reading the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Miss Voss, did your forensic team identify these transfers when they were analyzing the Foundation's accounts? Miranda Voss looked like she'd swallowed glass. Your Honor, our analysis focused on personal expenditures, not corporate donations. You assumed my client was stealing from her husband, Glenda said coldly, when in fact her husband was using her as an unwitting accomplice in federal money laundering. Every signature on those transfer authorizations forged. We have handwriting analysis from the FBI's Question Documents Laboratory. Dwayne finally spoke, his voice tight. This is insane. Those were legitimate business restructuring operations. My tax attorneys approved every— Your tax attorneys, Glenda interrupted, are currently receiving subpoenas, as is your CFO, your board of directors, and everyone at Owen Global Holdings who touched these transactions. She turned to Judge Allen. Your Honor, this is no longer a dissolution proceeding. This is the beginning of a federal criminal investigation. I am formally requesting that these civil proceedings be stayed pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Judge Allen set down the documents. His voice was measured but grave. Miss Voss, does your client wish to respond to these allegations? Miranda Voss looked at Dwayne. Dwayne looked at the floor. The silence spoke volumes.
Glenda had been silent for so long that when she finally spoke, the entire courtroom flinched. "I have something else," she said quietly, reaching into the folder in front of her. Her hands were steadier now, as if Glenda's presence had transferred some steel into her spine. She pulled out a document bound in heavy cream paper, sealed with red wax bearing an official-looking stamp, the kind of document that looked important even from across the room. She held it up, and the bailiff took it, carrying it to Judge Allen's bench. Glenda watched her daughter with something that might have been pride. Your Honor, that is a consent form filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2023. It bears my daughter's signature, authorizing Owen Global Holdings to use the Foundation's tax-exempt status as a vehicle for international charitable partnerships. Judge Allen examined the document, his reading glasses reflecting the overhead lights. This appears to have been notarized, filed officially. It was, Glenda confirmed, except my daughter never signed it, she never saw it, and she certainly never appeared before a notary to have it witnessed. Glenda's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried. I didn't know it existed until I found the original copy in his home office. He keeps everything, every acquisition contract, every patent filing. This was in a folder labeled GCI Compliance, my foundation's initials. She looked at Dwayne for the first time since the hearing began. You practiced my signature. There's a notepad in that same drawer filled with pages of you writing my name over and over, like a middle school student with a crush, except you were learning to forge federal documents. Dwayne's attorney leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear, but he shook his head violently. That's not— Glenda, you're taking this out of context. You signed so many things over the years, you probably just forgot. I didn't forget. I remember every document I signed for the foundation, every grant application, every tax form, every donor agreement. I built that organization from nothing. I knew every penny that went in and every penny that went out. Or at least, I thought I did. Glenda pulled out another folder. Your Honor, we have testimony from the notary whose stamp appears on this document. She's never met Mrs. Owen. She was paid $5,000 cash by Mr. Owen's executive assistant to notarize a signature without the signatory present, a federal crime. Miranda Voss finally stood, her voice strained. Your Honor, I need to request a recess to consult with my client. These allegations are far beyond the scope. The scope has changed, Miss Voss, Judge Allen said coldly. He was looking at the red-sealed document like it might explode.
This court is in recess for 30 minutes. Mr. Owen, I strongly suggest you speak with your attorney about the benefits of cooperation. As the judge left the bench, Dwayne turned to look at Glenda one last time. She met his gaze without flinching. The deer, it seemed, had found teeth.
When court resumed, Delinda Rosanna did something Miranda Wass hadn't expected. She called Dwayne Owen to the stand. Miranda objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is a preliminary hearing, not a trial. Witness testimony is—" "I'll allow it," Judge Allen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Mr. Owen, take the stand." Dwayne walked to the witness box with the same confident stride he used entering boardrooms, but there was something off about it now. His shoulders were too rigid, his jaw too tight. He was a man trying to execute a program that was already corrupted. Delinda approached with a single piece of paper. "Mr. Owen, you testified in your initial filing that my daughter was financially irresponsible, that she mismanaged the foundation's resources." "That's correct." Dwayne's voice was clipped, controlled, back to the analytical persona he'd cultivated for 20 years. "Yet you also routed $83 million through that same foundation over 3 years. Why would you trust someone you considered incompetent with that much money?" "I didn't trust her with it. I managed it. Without her knowledge. I signed the authorizations." "No," Delinda said softly. "You forged her signature. We've established that." Dwayne's face flushed. "The foundation was mine. I funded it. I built it. She was the face of it, the sympathetic story for donors." Judge Allen leaned forward. "Mr. Owen, are you saying you used your wife as a front for your own organization?" "Not a front, a brand ambassador. In Silicon Valley, authenticity is currency. Glenda provided authenticity. I provided strategy. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement." "A mutually beneficial arrangement that she knew nothing about," Delinda pressed. "She didn't need to know the details. She's not a businesswoman. Dwayne caught himself, but too late. "She's not capable of understanding complex financial structures." "Is that why you married her?" Delinda asked. "Because she wouldn't understand what you were doing?" "I married her because she was an asset." The words exploded out of Dwayne before he could stop them. "I mean, that's not what I meant. I meant she was valuable to my personal brand. When you're building a tech company, investors want to see stability, family. She provided that. So your marriage was a business transaction. All marriages are transactions. Love is just biochemistry. Commitment is just risk assessment. I assessed the risk of being alone versus the benefit of appearing settled, and I made a rational choice. That's what intelligent people do. We optimize." Judge Allen's expression had shifted from judicial neutrality to something closer to disgust. "Mr. Owen, did you ever consider your wife's feelings, her autonomy?" "Feelings are inefficient, Your Honor. They cloud judgment. I gave Glenda security, status, resources. She had everything she needed." "Except honesty," Delinda said. "Except respect. Except the basic human dignity of knowing she was being used." Dwayne's hands gripped the witness box. "I didn't use her. I created opportunities for her. Without me, she'd be nobody." That's when Glenda stood up. Her voice was steady, clear. "I'd rather be nobody than be your algorithm." Dwayne stared at her, and for the first time he seemed to realize what he'd lost. Not an asset, a person.
The news broke before Dwayne even left the courthouse. TechCrunch ran the headline at 2:47 p.m. By 3:15, Bloomberg had picked it up. By 4, it was trending on every platform that mattered. Dwayne sat in the back of his Tesla, stuck in Bay Area traffic, watching his empire crumble in real time on his phone. His assistant had called 6 times. His CFO had texted, "We need to talk immediately." His publicist had sent a resignation letter via email. But it was the calendar notification that made his blood run cold. Emergency board meeting, 5 p.m., your attendance mandatory. He arrived at Owen Global Holdings at 4:53. The building he'd designed himself, all glass and steel and algorithmic precision, suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Security nodded at him with expressions that looked suspiciously like pity. The elevator ride to the executive floor lasted an eternity. The boardroom was already full when he entered. 9 directors sat around the Brazilian walnut table, their faces carefully neutral. His CFO, Richard Morse, wouldn't meet his eyes. Sarah Chen, his longest-serving board member and early investor, looked like she'd aged 10 years since their last quarterly meeting. "Dwayne," she said as he took his seat, "we've reviewed the court documents that were filed this afternoon. We've also been contacted by the FBI. Sarah, let me explain the context." "There is no context," interrupted James Kellerman, the former Goldman Sachs executive who chaired the audit committee. "You used a non-profit foundation to launder corporate funds. You forged federal documents. You committed securities fraud." He slid a folder across the table. "Our counsel has advised us that every member of this board could potentially face criminal liability if we don't act immediately." Dwayne felt the room closing in. "I built this company. I took it from a garage startup to a $5 billion valuation. You can't—" "We can," Sarah said softly, "and we have to. Dwayne, the SEC's freezing company assets pending investigation. Our stock price dropped 18% in 90 minutes. We have venture capital partners threatening to pull funding. And that's before we talk about that Glenda Rosanna is now involved." That name hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Richard Morse finally spoke. "The Iron Judge sent 3 CEOs to federal prison in the 2010s. Enron, HealthSouth, WorldCom. Those prosecutors studied her methods. When she decides to destroy someone, she doesn't stop at the individual. She dismantles the entire ecosystem that enabled them. Which means she's coming for this board next," James added, "unless we cooperate, unless we demonstrate that we were victims of your deception, not accomplices." Sarah pushed a document toward Dwayne. "Effective immediately, you're being removed as CEO and stripped of your board seat. We're appointing an interim CEO and launching an internal investigation. We'll be cooperating fully with federal authorities." Dwayne stared at the paper, his signature line at the bottom, waiting. "You're voting me out of my own company?" "We already voted," Sarah said. 9-0. This is just documentation." Outside the glass walls of the boardroom, Dwayne could see his employees, his team watching. Word had spread fast. He picked up the pen with shaking hands. 20 years of vision, executed in a single signature. 6 weeks later, Glenda Owens stood in a federal courtroom, not the family court where this had begun, but the Northern District of California, where Dwayne Owen faced 14 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the gallery. Federal prosecutors sat at tables stacked with evidence. And Dwayne, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of Brioni, sat between 2 public defenders, looking like a mathematical equation that had finally been solved incorrectly. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at Glenda. "Mrs. Owen, you have the right to make a victim impact statement before sentencing. Do you wish to proceed?" Glenda stood. She wore the same yellow blazer from that first hearing, but now it didn't look bright, it looked defiant. She'd kept it specifically for this moment. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "for 15 years, I thought I was building a life. I thought I was building a partnership. I thought the man I married saw me as a person. She paused, looking directly at Dwayne. I was wrong on all 3 counts. Dwayne stared at the table before him. Dwayne Owen is brilliant. Everyone knows that. He built a $5 billion company from nothing. He revolutionized 3 different tech sectors. But what the world doesn't know is that he used that same brilliance to systematically erase me. Her voice didn't waver. He didn't just commit criminal crimes, he weaponized my compassion. I built a foundation to help women escaping domestic violence, to fund education programs, to create opportunities for people who had none, and he turned it into a criminal enterprise. She held up a photograph, one of her at a foundation gala, smiling beside a group of scholarship recipients. These women trusted me. They believed in what I was building, and because of him, federal investigators spent months auditing every dollar we ever touched. Some of our donors pulled funding, partner organizations severed ties. The original foundation I spent a decade building had to be dissolved, not because I did anything wrong, but because he used my name, my signature, my reputation as camouflage for his crimes. Glenda's hands tightened on the podium. But that's not the worst part, Your Honor. The worst part is that he never once apologized, never once acknowledged that I was a human being with dreams and dignity. Even now, sitting there, I don't think he understands what he did wrong. He understands that he got caught. That's different. She took a breath. People like Dwayne Owen see the world as a system to be optimized. People are variables, relationships are transactions, laws are obstacles to be coded around. And when someone like that has billions of dollars and institutional power, they can destroy lives without even noticing.
Judge Morrison was listening intently, her expression grave. Your Honor, my mother, Judge Rasana, taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about protection. It's about making sure that someone who's proven they'll exploit every vulnerability doesn't get the chance to do it again. Glenda's voice finally broke just slightly. I'm asking you to protect the next person Dwayne would see as an algorithm, because I promise you there would be one. She sat down. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of a journalist's pen. Dwayne still wouldn't look at her. 6 months after Dwayne Owen was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, Glenda sat in a conference room that overlooked San Francisco Bay. The space was smaller than Owen Global Holdings, but it was hers. The nameplate on the building read Rosanna Owen Foundation for Economic Justice. She'd kept Owen in the name, not for sentiment, but as a reminder, a scar that had become a badge. This was her second foundation. The first one had been tainted beyond repair by Dwayne's crimes and dissolved during the federal investigation. This one she'd built from nothing, with her own vision, her own rules, and ironclad safeguards against anyone who might try to weaponize compassion again. Around the table sat her new board of directors, her mother, Glenda, who'd agreed to serve as legal counsel emeritus, Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd resigned from Owen Global's board and brought her venture capital expertise, 3 nonprofit leaders whose organizations had survived similar exploitation, and Marcus Webb, a former FBI forensic accountant who now ran their compliance department. The Marshallship Fund is fully operational, Marcus reported, sliding a folder across the table. We've vetted every partner twice. Every transaction goes through 3 approval levels. Every signature gets witnessed and recorded. Glenda nodded. Good. I want absolute transparency. If we're going to rebuild trust, we do it by being the opposite of what Dwayne made us. Glenda watched her daughter with quiet pride.
The terrified woman in the yellow blazer was gone, replaced by someone who understood that power wasn't about domination, it was about accountability. "We've had 17 applications for the Domestic Violence Legal Fund," Sarah said. "Women who need attorneys but can't afford representation. After what happened with you, the applications tripled." "Fund all of them," Glenda said immediately. "Every woman who needs a lawyer gets one. That's our mandate." There was a knock at the door. Glenda's assistant entered with an envelope marked Federal Bureau of Prisons. Glenda opened it, scanned the contents, and set it down without emotion. "Dwayne requested a meeting. He wants to apologize." The room went quiet. Delinda's expression didn't change. "Do you want to go?" Glenda thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No, he had 15 years to apologize. He chose to commit 14 felonies instead. She picked up the letter and placed it in her shredder. Some people can't be optimized, they can only be removed from the equation. She turned back to the agenda. "Sarah, tell me about the new scholarship applications. I want to focus on women leaving corporate environments where they felt exploited." As the meeting continued, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the Foundation's new mission statement on the wall: "Building power through dignity, not transaction." Across the bay, in the Atherton mansion that had been seized by federal marshals and sold at auction, a new family was moving in. They had a dog and 2 children, and absolutely no idea about algorithms. And in a federal correctional facility in Lompoc, Dwayne Owens sat in a cell designed for 2 square meters of human existence, finally learning what it meant to be reduced to a number, to be managed, to be an asset in someone else's system. The optimization, it turned out, worked both ways. Glenda had rebuilt herself. Dwayne had simply been deleted.
Justice, it turns out, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a retired judge standing up in a courtroom gallery. Sometimes it's a woman in a yellow blazer finding her voice. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe for more incredible real-life legal battles and courtroom reversals. Drop a comment below. Would you have stood up for yourself like Glenda did? I'll see you in the next one.